I have been really feeling like making something swampy lately, so we're gonna build a kind of swampy scene from Ghost of Tsushima. For those that don't know, this is a game set in historical Japan, specifically during the Kamakura period, which is around 1185 to 1333. I wanted to make one of the elevated houses. These are called Takayuka Jukyo, the raised floor style, and they originated from the Yayoi period, which was from around 300 BC to 250 AD. From my research, the earliest versions of these were actually used as warehouses for storing grain and other things to keep them away from flooding and pests. Rather than making a really specific one from the game, I'm just gonna take all my favorite pieces and put them together. One of the things I really love about Ghost of Tsushima is it has a relatively extensive camera mode. It has so many different settings, so you can set the time of day, the weather, the depth of field, because the game is just so beautiful and cinematic. It's a really fun one to paint images from. So I took a ton of cool screenshots and then picked 3 that I wanted to paint. I wanted to do one in the swampy area that we're actually going to build our miniature in, one of a fall forest at night, and one on a tea farm. Was this necessary? No, but it was fun. To make everything look really nice on the page, I do think about the compositions of all of the different works together and how the colors will match as well. For this specifically, since we're doing 3, I chose to do one that was more left side focused, one that had more of a central focus, and one that had a right focus. Because when you put them together, it really kind of balances out and draws your eye down the page. For all these pieces, I am using a combination of acrylic paint and acrylic markers. You can probably tell by now that this is one of my favorite combos to use now. So my focus for all of these really was the lighting, which honestly I don't think that I nailed, but an attempt was certainly made. Probably should have done like a final wash at the end, and maybe I'll do that later, honestly. That's what this kind of practice is for. So overall, I didn't want to go too wild on these. I gotta hold myself back someplace because, believe me, I didn't in the miniature. So that's why we're here over 2 months later. I have gotten some comments and questions about if I would potentially sell prints of some of my artwork. If anybody would actually be interested, please let me know which ones you would be interested in seeing, what kind of artwork. I don't know if you want to see specifically artwork and paintings, or if you might even want to see prints of photos of the miniatures as well. Please let me know. Or even if you have any other suggestions. If I do end up doing it, it is going to take some time to set up because I would definitely be sending all of them myself to you. So let me know if you're interested, that's all. So let's take a look at our finished paintings. And now we can move on to our miniature, starting with the base of the house. So I cut all the pieces that will make up the walls and the floor from cardboard first, just so that we have something sturdy to work off of. I painted those brown to create some wood texture to lay on top of that brown. I'm painting paperboard and then cutting it into really thin strips, and then I can start laying it on in the pattern. This was a super long process, and there was a lot of it in this project, so buckle up, folks.
A samurai must always fight with patience and discipline.
Most of the wood was horizontal around the house, but around the doorways it was vertical. I imagine to build the door frame into it easier. The top is actually more of a straw, but I thought it looked like vertical wood in a different color, so that's what I ended up doing. I added a light dry brushing of brown on top to darken that upper area just a little bit, and we're really just continuing this all the way around the house. The 2 sides have windows cut out, one on each side. Then of course I need to frame out the windows and just finished off those edges. All right, well, we've got one side done. I am trying so hard to stop myself from doing the inside of this house.
Thousands of tears later.
We of course also had to do the floor in a very, very similar manner, and I also went over that with a brown dry brushing as well. There's lots and lots of different beam details throughout, so I am cutting some strips of popsicle stick, painting them in that same kind of driftwood color. I also cut a hole for a small vent on one end of the house. This is one of the areas in the game that you could kind of sneak in and out. I just built that directly into the spot that I cut out and framing it out. Once all of those pieces were textured on both sides, I could start assembling the pieces of the house together. I am having a very good time looking at this on the inside. On the bottom of the house, there are a bunch of supporting beams. They're actually quite similar to the bottom of Aunt Josephine's house. Elements of this project are very similar to Aunt Josephine's house in that they're both elevated over water, granted in a very different way. But I'm really just laying out this pattern with different skewers. It's basically just a grid. Then we're gonna move on to work on the interior. So I started making the ladder, which will lead to the second floor, attaching thin paperboard rungs to 2 side strips of paperboard. I did basically the same thing in my Link-Click Photo Studio build. That ladder sits in front of this dividing wall that has a really nice, very traditional Japanese wood design. I'm painting all the materials that I'm going to be using for this brown beforehand, and then it has a wooden paneled bottom. I used the second floor piece to determine where this needed to sit inside of the house. I'm adding some faux beams inside. I really tried to stop myself from doing anything on the interior, but there are windows. There's gotta be something in there. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, these kind of look like guinea pig or rabbit pellets. I just cut a bunch of pieces of skewer and then painted them, and then I got to lay them in there. Oh, these logs are just bringing me so much joy. I used a scrap strip of yellow fabric and painted it a little bit greenish to be the various mats that are around the fire pit in the wooden house. I don't know. I didn't design this. I'm making a burnt area with some black chalk pastel and then just laying some burnt looking pieces of wood in there. I'm going to be using these lights later in this project, and I always have to take off the decorative pieces, and these ones have these small little plastic pieces that you can pop out. So these are super great because they're really easy to just paint and they look pretty much just like buckets, and they're perfect for the scale that I'm working at. I'm really just trying to use a lot of different scrap pieces I have laying around. There's also an area with a bunch of fruit on the floor. I also use these to make some different little hanging pieces. I threw in a little shelf that I didn't let dry, and it was just, you know, falling apart, but we're going for realism here. The interiors were quite disheveled generally in the game for these structures, so I figured it didn't really need to be perfect. I also threw together a couple of really terrible bookshelves. We're gonna put some various craft leftovers on these too, so they're gonna cover up a lot of the terribleness of them. These go by the 2 doorways, and then I'm putting some corner beams in to finish off those edges. These are just painted skewers again. And last but not least, there is a hanging grid over the fire with a hook. I cut the main shape of this from paperboard and painted it brown. At this scale, I could not possibly cut this tiny grid, so I also laid thread in the pattern to divide the squares even further, and then all we need to do is attach some thread to the area of the ceiling it will hang from. I also made a tiny hook from wire for the middle. I need to just stop myself here. I have this ladder here, and then the interior was done. Then we need to jump back to finish up some details on the outside of the house. So I added these little wooden window covers. I'll spare you the wood texturing.
Today, I die for my people.
It was the same. Then we need to finish off some of the raw cardboard edges with paperboard. On the side of the house that I did not put the vent, I will be adding a little porch that will sit over the water. So 3 painted pieces of skewer are the main base of this, and then over top we'll lay some more painted paperboard strips, and then we're using quite a similar technique to build the awning on top of this. So I laid a row of paperboard strips and then 2 beam pieces on top. At this point I was burning out a little bit on working on the main house.
Help me.
And just, you know, laying on so many strips of faux wood. So I moved on to working on the terrain. This house is going to sit partially on land and partially over water. I'm gonna be making my usual battery pack holder so that it can just slide into the side and I can still access the power switch, and I can also pull it out and change the battery. I've done this in quite a few projects. So I am making a little section from cardboard that the battery pack will slot into. I also made a little side channel to run the cord through. I'm using this to decide the height of the land portion of the base. So we're just gonna continue building up the sides of the terrain next to it. This is probably the coolest part of this. Actually, maybe I'm saying that. I'm the only one that's gonna think that, but I'm gonna hide the cord of the lights threading up through one of the supports that the house will be elevated on, which will be made from straws. This is really nice because they're hollow on the inside, so I can thread all of the lights through it and hide it inside. Then we're left with a really good skeleton for our terrain that we can paper mache on top of. I'm laying down some foil first to give the hill a little bit more structure when I go over it with the paper mache, and then we'll start mixing up our flour and water paper mache mixture. As always, I'm just brushing some of that on, laying a strip of newspaper over top, and then going over top of that. I made sure to do quite a few layers of this time, especially where the hill meets the bottom, because we're going to be doing resin later, so we definitely don't want to have any gaps. I let that dry overnight, and then I made sure also to seal it with a couple of layers of Mod Podge to really make sure that we have no space for resin to seep through. We're going to paint all of that with a light brownish gray base. I sponged on some green grass on the main base area, and then I can start building the dock. So I cut a bunch of pieces of skewers to start the base of this. These are gonna lay on either side of the dock, kind of supporting it. I laid those in with paperboard cut to the dock width so that I had a guide for where they needed to sit. Those get cross beams attached to them, and then I painted the whole thing. I also dry brushed some dark brown over top, and then I started laying paperboard wood pieces on top of that to create the surface of the dock. Then we can start working on the underwater area. So I did first a thin layer of dirt to give some nice texture to work off of on the bottom. Now in the game, the underwater area is pretty much, well, there's nothing, but I wanted this to look more like the actual surface of a pond, perhaps, with lots of different textures. Let's just try these out. I did try these for the first time in this, so thank you so much to Neil. I'm putting some green paint on a cut piece of a makeup sponge to sponge on some different dark green, kind of maybe mossy algae areas. And I continued this mossy paint job onto the dock as well. Could we call this dry sponging, I guess?
Come on, Squidward, you're missing all the dry.
Basically, I'm using barely any paint. Like when you're dry brushing, I'm just, you know, using a sponge. This is a very mossy project, so it was super fun to build up moss and overgrown areas with lots of different combinations of different materials. I'm also using some cut pieces of this scouring pad as additional moss. The texture is actually a lot like moss if you carefully pull it apart. Am I doing too much? Maybe, but we'll keep going. I'm using my favorite battlefield grass to lightly coat some areas. Then we need to make some kind of lotus slash lily leaves. So I'm starting with some super thin green jewelry wire for the stems, cutting them to various different heights. I kind of formed them in tiny clusters because that's how they grow a lot of the time. And then I'm cutting some really tiny circle pieces from these fake leaves and just laying them on top of the wire that's sticking up. This was maybe one of my favorite parts of the project. It was so much fun to make these little lotus lily plants. And I'm not just saying that because I'm obsessed with lotus. Or maybe I am, I don't know.
I'm just having a great time sitting here, cutting out all of these tiny lily pads and placing them on every single wire that I have here. We're having a good time.
Then I'm cutting some various wood to lay at the bottom. I'm coating those with a mossy dry brush, of course. Really just trying to layer things on and blend everything together really well. On the dock, I'm going to put a small bucket that I am making in the same manner as the ones from the interior, from the little plastic light caps. And then we need to make some fish. So I cut these from craft foam. I wanted to keep these pretty simple because we had to make quite a few of them, and then I painted them with different shades of blue. You know, fish things. I also did do a layer of CT interference over top to give it more of a scaly, shiny look. You literally can't see this at all. So it was pointless, but it felt necessary in my heart. And then I just placed those throughout underwater. So you know I just had to add someone fishing on the dock. I'm making the clothes from tissue paper as always. The top of this figure was already pretty good to work off of, so I really just needed to wrap it around the bottom to give it more of the shape of traditional Japanese clothing. And then we just need to paint everything a dark blue. And the fun part of this was making the pattern on top. This is when I feel like it really started to actually look like something. Then we could paint the face. No eyes though. Absolutely no eyes. Because at this scale, believe me, they would be so scary. I also added some little sandals. I used a really thin strip of white tissue paper around the middle to add a little sash. Made a hat from cardstock, just a little circle with a slit cut and glued together, and just painted that. And then glued the hat onto the head. I decided to make a little basket with cardstock and glued it onto his back. And finally, we could put a couple of little fish in the basket as well. He's had a good fishing day, I suppose.
You think you can do better?
I did end up making another figure. I want to say that it's Jin, but honestly, it didn't turn out looking that much like him. I didn't have any figures that really resembled him very much, so I kind of just winged it as best as I could. I'm making the outfit with tissue paper as always, and then just painting everything. I also made some little samurai swords from really thin sliced pieces of wood. The place that I really ran into trouble was the head. I really just could not get it to look like his head, so I put a hat on him. It looks like some kind of samurai enough, I think, so that's good enough for me. Then we can start working on some various other outside props while we're at it. I made a boat from paperboard, just cutting all of the shapes out and gluing them together. This was actually pretty similar in shape to the basket of Zuko's war balloon. I added the little seat inside and then painted it. Then I could attach the boat to the side of the dock so that it will stay in the right place when we add the resin later. And then inside the boat, there's 2 sticks, maybe fishing poles, I would guess. So I just cut those from matchsticks. There's also a little coil of rope, and then we can move back to finish up the exterior house. So I'm adding the rest of the house stilts on. These are all cut straws. There's 1 on each corner and 2 in the middle on each side, so there's 6 in total. I also measured where I wanted the house to sit and cut the one that is built into the base to size, and then I'm just painting everything to match, and then we can start some weathering. Mostly adding moss. So first we're gonna dry brush some dark green in different mossy areas. Then we're finally finishing that front overhang piece. On top of this, we are going to lay a foam piece of packaging that will be the textured mossy roof. And then we'll start building up moss details with our battlefield grass and other various types of moss. This is the best part as a model maker. This is where you can cover up any small mistakes, and it really just brings a lot of the piece together. As always, I wanted the lights to be a warmer tone. We're just coloring them with some orange permanent marker to warm up the color temperature. I'm gonna have a couple of the lights thread inside the house, but most are going to go into the water for the lanterns. So we need to thread back down through the other side support beam straw. Then we need to make the front ladder leading up to the house. I'm just making this from pieces of craft foam. I'm also gonna use some craft foam squares to make faux beams coming from the base of the house, just just along the bottom trim. Then we just have to paint the beams to match the rest of the house color, and we'll carry the moss onto the ladder as well. And more moss, and more moss, and more moss. Then we'll start building out more of the front landscape. So I added a path connecting the different areas with some dry brushing. Then we can put our ladder in and start building this little fishing net stand area. Once the main shape was up, we could hang some rope pieces and they just kind of drape across the whole thing. The most important part is this kind of fish netting, which will be made from this mesh ribbon. Glued it on again, doing my best to drape it into the shape that it looks like. So take one last peek at the inside after all that work, because we're gluing the second floor in. Then I can finally attach the ladder that we made. In any long project like this, there comes a time that I just lose all motivation to keep going. It's really annoying because I'm pretty close to the end here. I'm thinking about all of these other ideas of projects that I want to work on, and I just really wish I could jump to working on those instead, just to do something fresh. We're gonna get through it. I made a bucket earlier and I can't find it. And I think it might be in the trash can. Roll the clip.
Your future is full of struggle and anguish, most of it self-inflicted.
Do you see this right now? Even the materials are trying to get me to find inspiration.
And then we can start building the roof. So of course we are starting with some base cardboard shapes. Once we get to the peak of the roof, I can put the top beam in the middle, which is just made from a chopstick. I cut some paperboard shapes to make this kind of mossy layered look to make some texture on the paperboard for the roof. I embedded some dirt into some green acrylic paint, and then we can just glue on the roof pieces in layers going up. Filled all of the gaps and painted everything green to blend it all together. Now, after I had done all of that, I was sitting there and I decided there just wasn't enough texture, and I really wanted to carry that mossy layered look onto the sides. Went over top, stippling some paper mache liquid to give it more of a grassy texture. Once that was dry, I painted everything green again, and it was just a way better texture. So if at first you don't succeed, try again. I went over top of that with some varying shades of green. Then we have to finish off under the roof beams, so I added some pieces of skewers once again. The roof also has some wood details near the top, so I'm laying on a few wood strips of paperboard that will get blended onto the roof mostly. Sometimes you really just have to keep building up layers of things and painting the same thing 3 times.
You know nothing of suffering. It took days.
And then I laid cut pieces of popsicle stick over top in this kind of grid pattern. Of course, the roof also has a ton of different plants and leaves on it, so I'm cutting up some little green packing paper pieces to make leaves on the roof. Then I moved down into the terrain in front of the house and started making patches of taller grass, just using the various moss that I had on hand. Are you all sick of the moss yet? Because that was a lot of this project. I touched so much grass while making this. And then we broke out the ever elusive woodland tufts, because this is a special occasion, my friends. You may be wondering where the other side of this path leads to. We are going to make a side bridge. So I cut the shapes from paperboard. I tried to keep it quite simple. Okay, well, I say that, but I just glued those pieces together and built up a little railing along either side. The roof is kind of a flat pyramid shape, so I just kind of cut some triangle-ish pieces and then laid them on together. Once we had that, we can glue that roof and the bridge base together. I painted the base of this black so that I can lay cobblestones on top. To make these, I cut pieces of paperboard into stone-like shapes, and then I just had to kind of puzzle piece them together. This was quite fun. I was a big fan of tessellations in 3rd grade, so this spoke to me. The roof was really the same process pretty much as the main roof. I just tiered everything, textured it, and then we could paint the rest of the bridge, add moss, and the bridge could be attached. It's leading to nowhere, but that's life, isn't it? The last thing I had to do before adding resin is the lanterns that will be floating on the water. I was so excited for this part. I cut a piece from paperboard that's basically just a square in the middle with 4 thin strips, 2 on each side, coming out from it. Cut some little holes in the middle of these for the lights to thread through, and then we can wrap the outside with paper, and we have the lanterns. Super, super simple. Our Patreon project challenge for the last couple of months was water, and we had some really, really cool projects as always. For this project, for me, that meant resin. Before we even start thinking about resin, let me just emphasize how important it is to be safe. Please make sure that you are using proper PPE because resin is a chemical and it can be very damaging to your health. So use gloves, wear a respirator, do it in a well-ventilated area. It's really so much better to be safe than sorry, so please do some research if you're gonna work with resin and you don't know anything about the safety. Here's the thing. I absolutely love how resin looks. However, I will say I do not personally enjoy the process of doing resin. I'm gonna be using up the rest of my resin that I got 3 years ago. I used it in a couple of projects, if you remember. It was in the Autumn Studio Ghibli build and also the Jack and Daxter project. So since my resin is so old, the hardener has yellowed quite a bit. However, for this project, that actually was totally fine because I wanted kind of a greenish water. So luckily, color theory is on our side this time, and we just gotta add a little bit of blue. Now listen, I know this looks like Shrek, but I promise in a really thin layer, it's going to be a lot subtler. We're going for the swamp vibe anyway, so if it's Shrek, so be it. I'm going to premix the color in the hardener so that the color is consistent throughout both pours. Then we just have to let everything cure. Everything went well, but we need to demold. Then we can just kind of clean everything up and finish it off. And then we're going to add the lanterns over the lights that are sticking up from the water. I can also attach the figure, put a bucket next to him, and also I'm going to attach a fishing rod as well. I'm not gonna lie to you, during this build, I thought I was done so many times.
We're not finished yet. Find your resolve and fight through the pain.
I just kept adding more things. On top of the water, I am going to be adding some floating kind of lotus lily pad sort of things to build out those clusters of plants even more. I also added some beams on the roof with white ribbons hanging from them. I'm pretty sure the purpose of these is only for the game in that they make it easier for you to see where you can actually latch on and climb up. And then I also wanted to add one of the little wind chimes onto the porch as well. I just made that out of some paperboard and just glued that on. And then the project was complete. So let's take a look at our final scene. I loved this project so much. I really love building stuff that is kind of a combination of architecture and nature, so this was the perfect project for that. I do say this every time, but because this project was so long, I want to say extra this time. A huge thank you to everybody over on Patreon. You all are pretty much the only reason that I can do projects that are this long. As always, there will be some really fun behind the scenes from this project over on Patreon in a bonus video. The next miniature project is going to be one that is super close to my heart, but there might be a painting video before that. I hope you all could enjoy this one.